Just in, SBF, or Sam Bankman-Fried, is officially being charged by the SEC for defrauding its FTX users. But Sam Bankman-Fried swears that FTX US, which is a different branch from FTX International, is actually solvent, and we'll dive deeper into why he thinks this is and whether or not it's true. And finally, in slightly more positive news, the new FTX chief executive says that they could restart FTX. What are the chances of that happening? It remains to be seen. So let's take a look at this article where SBF swears up and down that he can pay back US customers, and then I'll dive a little deeper and give you my thoughts of whether or not this is actually true. Spoiler alert, I don't think so. The disgraced former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried repeated his claim that the US arm of his crypto empire is solvent, meaning it has enough cash to repay customers who lost money when the exchange collapsed. Quote, FTX US is solvent as it always has been, end quote, he tweeted on Tuesday, sharing a link to a Substack post where he questioned recent calculations made by bankruptcy lawyers. He definitely has a lot of free time because he's been tweeting a lot and also posting these very in-depth blogs, still trying to profess his innocence despite mounting evidence of the contrary. So this was 2 days ago, and it's a little bit wordy and hard to understand, but I'll try my best to summarize it. Let's just read a little bit of what he's saying. Today, Sullivan and Cromwell, SNC, released some more information about FTX US. Sullivan and Cromwell is the law firm that was hired by FTX Group to oversee its bankruptcy proceedings. Some of this information was extremely helpful. They gave substantially more information on the assets that FTX US holds. But some of what SNC released is extremely misleading. In particular, they write, the assets identified as of the petition date are substantially less than the aggregate third-party customer balance suggested by the electronic ledger for FTX US. And in the presentation, they said, quote, investigation has confirmed shortfalls at both international and US exchange, end quote. SBF is saying, and I quote, these claims by SNC are wrong and contradicted by data later on in the same document. FTX US was and is solvent, likely with hundreds of millions of dollars in excess of customer balances, end quote. If you are a FTX user and you hear this, you might get excited because the ex-CEO is saying that no, the money's actually there. There's more than enough to cover customer withdrawals. But we have to remember that SBF is a notorious liar. It's pretty well proven that there was a bunch of money that went missing. To keep it really simple, essentially he had a trading company called Alameda Research, and then he had his crypto exchange on FTX. What he was essentially doing was funneling FTX funds that were given to him by customers and using it to trade in his other company, in Alameda Research. These are two separate entities. They were co-mingling funds. He was taking money that was not his and investing, aka gambling, in his trading arm because his trading arm was not doing well. They were over leveraged. They were in very high risk plays and high risk cryptos, and when the whole market collapsed, they just didn't have enough money to cover all of their positions. And instead of letting Alameda Research go bankrupt, he just kept taking money out from the customers' piggy banks and funneling it into his other company, which is totally 100% illegal. A majority of this issue was with FTX International. That's the main company that went under, that had most of the world's assets. Now, FTX US is different. This was a company that was separate and only in charge of US people that were trading. He treated everything like one big piggy bank. So it's hard to say how much he actually took from FTX US to support his other failing companies. And this is what further investigation will hopefully bring to light. But right now he's saying it's a separate entity, that the balance sheet was solvent, that he had enough money. Again, if you look at his Twitter, all he's been doing is feigning ignorance as the person in charge of everything, that he had no idea what was going on. That's been his pretty consistent message. Just, he was stupid, but he wasn't malicious in his actions. All of the evidence really proves contrary. He likes to play dumb when it suits him, whereas before all this went down, he was viewed as some genius wonderkin kid. It just doesn't pass the smell test, but let's dive a little deeper into what he's saying. So let's take a look at this balance sheet, and this was created in the morning of November 10th, 2022. So he's saying that customer balances, this is what's owed to customers, is about $437 million, Wallet balances is what FTX held, about 436. So just taking these two numbers into account, there is a deficit of about $731,000. But SBF is saying that they did not include any of these bank balances, the FBO Corp Reg bank balances. And if you were to add these three numbers up, it'd be $352 million of cash. So if you take into account this deficit plus the amount of cash they actually have a net positive of over $351 million in cash. This total easily covers this customer balance of $437 million. He says here, this balance sheet showed FTX US is overcapitalized by roughly $350 million. Let's read the article a little bit more. As a contrast, S&C is now claiming that there is a shortfall at FTX US, where the asset identified as of the petition date are substantially less than the aggregate third-party customer balances. As far as I can tell by petition date, they mean November 11th, 2022. That means that they're using a snapshot about 1 day after mine, which means that while our net numbers should be similar, they are likely to find substantially lower asset and substantially lower customer balances that I did, as there were net withdrawals on November 10th. A straightforward reading of S&C's statements suggests they are making a large and basic mistake. They claim that the FTX debtors have identified approximately $181 million of digital assets associated with FTX US as of the petition date. Digital assets isn't defined, but one might interpret it to include tokens, but not bank balances. They go on to say that the asset identified as of the petition date are substantially less than the aggregate third-party customer balances suggested by the electronic ledger for FTX US. Goes on, yada, yada, yada. So essentially, he's saying that the S&C, they're using a snapshot of everything that happened 1 day after SBF's, and there were actually a bunch of withdrawals on the 10th. So even though they're seeing a lower number, it's because customers had already withdrew their money. What is actually owed to the customers is less, and also what is showing is less. So based on the accurate numbers, according to SBF, they have enough money to cover the new amount of customer balances that is still outstanding. There's a lot more technical jargon here. You're not really sure what's accurate and where he's pulling these numbers from. And if you don't even know what's true or not, it's just hard to decipher. But in summary, this is what he's saying in his words, quote, I had an estimated roughly $350 million more cash on hand than customer balances required, which is short for NAV. Using the extremely conservative estimates, their presentation implies a NAV of roughly $111 million. And using the more reasonable estimate, you get a NAV of $409 million, pretty close to my number, all of which is to say, one way or another, their data actually confirms that FTX US was extremely likely to be solvent when I handed it off, with at the very least $111 million of excess cash. It also implies that my estimate of $350 million excess cash was probably roughly correct. In his own words, he's saying there isn't enough information to actually prove that. I know that was kind of a lot, but what do I think? It's really hard to say. I think if what SBF's saying is actually true, it would be pretty easy to prove that or to uncover that. I don't think this law firm that they hired or, the federal government is going to see that, hey, there's actually enough money to cover customer withdrawals and then take the money somewhere else. If the money is there, eventually I think it will go back to the customers, but that is a big, big if. SBF is a proven and known liar. He is a master evader. Everything he says should be taken with a big grain of salt. All he's trying to do is just to make him seem innocent. He's trying to turn public perception for him. And you can see what he's doing because of his constant tweeting, just defending himself. And of course, people who lost money, people who know what's going on, know that most of it is bullshit. But for some people that are on the fence who don't know exactly what had happened, you might want to give him the benefit of the doubt, especially if he's saying stuff that even though you don't think is true, you wish or you hope to be true. And just with that little bit of hope, you might be inclined to actually be on his side or support him, because even though he's the person that caused this issue, a lot of people might think, oh, maybe he could somehow save it or salvage it. I'm sure his lawyers don't advise him to do this, but I do think there's some merit, and it does help him in some way if he keeps defending himself. Some people are going to believe what he says. And finally, the FTX chief, John Ray, says that bankrupt crypto exchange FTX could actually restart. So they are looking into the possibility of reviving its business. Ray, this chief executive, who became famous by managing the Enron restructuring, he's looking into whether they can recover more of the customers' assets who lost money if they were to actually restart the exchange. What happened behind the scenes was just complete fraud. But as an exchange, it worked as it should. And in exchange, you make money when people trade, and people love trading. People love trading crypto, especially. I think there's definitely a way where the exchange could be put back online, and then it could generate more funds for the customers. But on the flip side, I think that its name brand has been permanently tarnished, at least for many, many years to come. So it's going to be really hard for people to build trust again. At the same time, on the flip side, I do think people's memories are shorter than ever. So when they see something rise from the ash like a phoenix, it might entice them to actually give it another try. And people might think, oh, it went bankrupt once. What are the chances it might go bankrupt again? They must be doing their due diligence now. I mean, FTX was supported by some of the most well-funded hedge funds, famous hedge funds in the world. Not just regular people were invested. Everybody was invested. But when you have money, when you have a name, even when it's been tarnished, I do think there's a chance that it could come back online and be fairly successful, though it does have a long road ahead of it. But yeah, what do you think? Do you think FTX should be revived, or should it be taken into the back shed and made unalive forever? That's it. Thanks for watching.